My husband passed away in a car accident, leaving behind $1 million in debts. My mother-in-law begged me not to remarry, and my sister-in-law said she couldn't live without me. I gave in to my soft heart and agreed. Not only did I take on all the debts, but I also helped my sister-in-law get into a prestigious national school. It wasn't until I went to the hospital for a checkup due to exhaustion that I discovered my husband, who was supposed to have died years ago, was actually accompanying another woman for her prenatal checkup. My mother-in-law was happily smiling beside them, saying that in 2 months I would be able to hold my little grandson. My sister-in-law also supported the idea, suggesting that the woman should take on several jobs to support my nephew. I was extremely angered by this and rushed over to argue with them, only to end up being sent to a psychiatric hospital by them all together. After enduring endless torment, I felt desperate and eventually chose to jump out of the window to end my life. When I woke up again, I found myself back on the day my husband had the accident. He said, "Once I finish this delivery, I promise to get you a bigger house." Silas Hale was packing up his things while talking to me about the future. In the past, I would have felt really happy hearing this, but now I only felt a bit dazed. "By the way, honey, could you sign this guarantee for me?" Silas said, handing me a document. At that moment, I finally realized that I had been reborn. "This is a request from the other party's boss. Don't worry, it's just a formality and there shouldn't be any issues." Last time, Silas was in a similar situation. He told me that a friend needed his help to transport a shipment of goods to another location, and if he succeeded, he would earn hundreds of thousands in rewards and wanted me to invest as well. Because the goods were very valuable, the other party required a guarantor, and Silas immediately thought of me. To persuade me to sign, Silas even mentioned that the opportunity was given to us because of my family's good background. At that time, I was eager to help Silas, so I agreed without much thought. But who would have thought that this was just a carefully crafted deception of his? Remembering the painful experiences from my past life, my body couldn't help but tremble. Silas, seeing that I wasn't responding, pushed me again and said, "What are you doing? If you don't sign soon, it will be too late." Unable to contain my anger, I threw the guarantee document right at his face and shouted, "I won't sign. Anyone who wants to sign can go ahead." Silas was taken aback, clearly not expecting me to react that way. After a moment he said, "If you don't sign, who will? You're my wife. If something happens to me, you'll still have to clean up the mess, right?" A cold laugh stirred within me as I realized that he had just revealed his true intentions after claiming it was just a formality. He really expected me to be the one to take the hit. However, who knows? If something were to really happen to you, I would definitely leave first. I threw that line out and turned to exit the bedroom. "Adelwyn, wait a minute." Silas chased after me and handed me the guarantee document again. "No matter what you think today, just sign this guarantee document first." I coldly laughed and said, "Are you insisting that I sign because you have some ulterior motive?" Silas's gaze flickered slightly, and his attitude softened. "Dear, what are you thinking? Haven't you always wanted me to achieve something that would make your parents notice? Now that I finally have this opportunity, how can you not support me? My parents have never liked Silas, so I wanted to help him and prove that my judgment was correct. As it turned out, my judgment was completely wrong. Silas, if you have the ability, work hard to succeed on your own, instead of relying on women." "What do you mean by that? Do you look down on me too?" Because our families have different financial situations, Silas has been very sensitive in this marriage. I used to consider his pride, but I don't think that way anymore. So what? Just look at what you've done. What have you done that deserves anyone's respect? How can you say that to me? Silas was very angry and raised his hand as if to hit me. The mother-in-law immediately came out of the kitchen to stop him, asking what he was doing. "It's just a signature, there's no need to act like this," she said. Silas, out of breath, responded, "Mom, if she doesn't sign, I can't complete this order." "Fine, it's all up to you now, Mom. Find someone else to guarantee it." The mother-in-law pulled Silas aside and whispered something to him, and his expression gradually softened. I don't want to deal with them anymore, so I just grabbed my coat and bag and headed out the door. In my past life, I had a big argument with my family over Silas, But now all I want is to hurry back and apologize to my parents. They have always cared for me deeply, and this time when I took the initiative to return home and admit my mistakes, they were overjoyed and wanted to take me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a divorce from Silas. I refused, because if I divorce him now, Silas would get half of my assets, and he doesn't deserve any of it. I asked my parents to help me contact the legal team at WinCorp, and after dinner, I was getting ready to go home. However, just as I stepped out of the villa's gate, my mother-in-law called me. She said that Silas had been in a car accident, and all the cargo in the vehicle had been looted by passers-by. We would have to compensate them for over $1 million. Where is Silas? Silas has passed away. Hearing this exact same phrase as the last time made me furrow my brow in disbelief. I have already refused to sign the guarantee letter. How dare they use the same trick again? I hurried to the hospital, and as soon as I got out of the car, my mother-in-law knelt down in front of me. Adele, Silas is gone. You can't just ignore your mother. She pleaded. And Clara Hale's tuition also depends on you. If you can help her finish college, I will do my best for you. My heart tightened, and I quickly shook her hand away. If something happens to Silas, my marriage with him will be over, and I won't want to deal with any of you. What? My mother-in-law was so shocked that she stood up immediately. My son loves you so much. How can you just abandon us? I replied with a cold smile. If he truly loves me, he definitely wouldn't want to hold me back. Mother-in-law, that's not acceptable. You must pay off the debts my son owes, and you also need to set aside some money for Clara's college tuition. I don't want to be the one taking the fall for this. Whether you want to or not, you have to. What do you mean by that? The mother-in-law sneered and said, Silas's guarantee is stamped with your seal. You can't distance yourself from this matter. Are you stealing my seal? I was so furious that I was about to go crazy. How can you call it stealing? You are a couple, and it's quite normal to help each other with the seal. Alright, let's assume I did stamp it, but the guarantee states that I only need to repay the debt if Silas passes away or becomes incapacitated. Therefore, I need to see his body to confirm that it is indeed him. The matter of the corpse left my mother-in-law stunned. She said, feeling guilty, the body has turned into pulp, so even if you see it, you won't be able to recognize it. Let's just leave it at that. I smiled and replied, it's okay. I brought a forensic expert. After saying this, I opened the back door and invited my forensic friend to come out. My mother-in-law's face instantly turned pale. After a moment, she seemed to remember something, patted her forehead, and pretended to have a revelation, saying, oh dear, I was so anxious earlier that I misspoke. Silas isn't actually dead. He was just seriously injured and may never be able to work again. Really? Then I want to see how serious his injuries are. My mother-in-law had no choice but to take me to see Silas. As soon as Silas, lying in the hospital bed, saw me, he immediately cried out loudly. He grabbed my hand and shed tears, saying, my dear, I thought I would never see you again. I smiled faintly, then withdrew my hand and gently tapped his knee. Ow! What are you doing? Silas jumped up in fright. I gave a cold smile and slowly said, seeing that you can still jump around, it seems your injury isn't that serious. You should be able to repay your debts yourself. Only then did Silas realize what was going on and quickly explained, but honey, I can't come up with that much money right now. Can you lend me some first? I'll pay you back as soon as I have the money. Giving money to someone like that is simply a waste of effort. I don't have any money. Can't you first ask your parents for some? I immediately became furious. Is it appropriate for you to say that? How did you speak to my parents when we got married back then? You promised at the beginning that you wouldn't seek any money from my family, even saying that you wouldn't accept a single cent even if offered. Later on, my parents really stopped giving money, but he kept hinting that I should ask for it. Looking back now, I realize I was really naive over the years. Even though Silas might be shameless, there's a hint of guilt on his face at this moment. However, my mother-in-law sees no issue with it. Now that we are facing difficulties, it's only reasonable for our in-laws to help us out. You usually enjoy talking badly about my parents to your relatives and friends, right? Why are you calling them your in-laws now that you need money? How dare you speak to me like this? Why shouldn't I? I took out my phone and directly threatened, saying that if you push me for money again, I will report you for stealing my personal seal to sign contracts. What? My mother-in-law was taken aback. I smirked, not expecting this, right? My memory isn't very reliable, and I sometimes can't find important documents. So, I installed a surveillance camera in my study and unexpectedly, I recorded some evidence of inappropriate behavior. My mother-in-law turned pale with fear. Silas quickly tried to ease the tension, saying, "Honey, I was just joking. How could I dare to let your parents pay for me? You're right to think that way." I didn't want to continue getting tangled up with them, especially since I had to hurry home to go through the shared assets with Silas. In my previous life, I truly considered Silas's family as my own, so I never refused them whenever they asked for help. Now, I honestly had no idea how much money I had spent on them. To my surprise, when I checked, I found that the amount I had spent on myself over the years was actually less than a quarter of my total expenditures. The rest was mostly family expenses, as well as money given to my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and part of it was transferred to Silas. This transfer was not initiated by me but was secretly taken by Silas. I was furious and was just about to call Silas to demand an explanation when my sister-in-law called me first. She said, "Sister-in-law, please transfer me 5,000 yuan. I want to go see my idol's concert." I had always treated my sister-in-law like my own sister and never refused her whenever she asked for money, so she regarded borrowing money from me as a matter of course. Sure. But this time I won't indulge her anymore. I'm out of money. What are you talking about? How could you be broke? Don't you earn several thousand a month? That's money I've earned through hard work. Why should I give it to you? My sister-in-law was taken aback at first, and then she said angrily, "This is the first time my idol is holding a concert in our city. How can you refuse me? What does it matter if I refuse you? You're not my child, and legally I have no obligation to support you." Your sister-in-law was very angry and finally said, "Fine, if you're unwilling, I'll just call my brother." After saying this, she really called Silas. There's nothing I can do but wait. However, after more than 10 minutes, my phone suddenly received a text message, indicating that someone had withdrawn 30,000 yuan from my card. I immediately called Silas and asked him, "Did you just use my money to take your sister to the concert?" "Yes, a lot of people from her class are going. If she doesn't go, how can she hold her head up in front of her classmates in the future?" "Alright, then let me ask you, the concert tickets are 5,000 yuan, so why did you withdraw 30,000? "Oh, Clara said her roommate wanted to go too, so I invited her along as well." I was really angry. Why was he being so generous? Why didn't he just pay for himself? Didn't he always use that card before? His words left me stunned, and I thought to myself that I definitely shouldn't have given him face. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked Silas, and I also changed the password for that card. That night, my mother-in-law and Silas returned from the hospital quickly, and they didn't even dare pretend to be sick anymore. As soon as Silas walked in, he asked me, "Did you change the password to the bank card?" "That's right." "What do you mean? Is it not enough that you won't help pay off the debts, but now you're also unwilling to contribute even a little for the medical expenses? I am truly disappointed." That lazy man actually got so angry that he no longer cares about his image. Not only will I not spend a dime, but I will also never spend a penny on anyone in your family again. Silas gritted his teeth in anger. My mother-in-law criticized me. "How can you be so heartless? Whose daughter-in-law is like you?" I sneered. "Indeed, there are very few daughters-in-law like me. So, from now on, you all need to pay half of the mortgage. You'll have to cover all of Clara's school expenses, and you'll also need to be responsible for living expenses." My mother-in-law was so angry that her chest was heaving, and it took her a while to say, "Are you trying to give me a heart attack? You won't let us use your money. Have you spent it on someone else?" I retorted, "Watch your language or I might sue you for defamation." My mother simply commented, "Why are you so worked up?" Silas pulled his mother behind him and looked at me angrily. He said that he had noticed something was wrong with me, since before my last business trip, and wanted me to show him my bank statements to see if I had other men in my life. Why should I have to do that? This card is my personal card. and you haven't deposited a single penny into it over the years. Mother-in-law, I don't care what kind of card it is, after marriage it's joint property, and my son has the right to know about every expenditure you make. All right. I directly tossed my phone onto the table, and the screen displayed all the expenses from this card perfectly. The two of them immediately leaned in to check the statement, and their expressions grew worse the more they looked. Have you finished? I said with a cold smile. For the sake of fairness, shouldn't I also take a look at Silas's card? The mother-in-law became anxious and insisted that my son had done nothing wrong, so there was no need to show me anything. I sneered and said that while I could choose not to look, they had to tell me who Silas was transferring money to from my card every month. Who else could it be? Of course it was for our household expenses. Silas quickly interjected, a hint of unease showing in his eyes. However, you've transferred money incorrectly several times, sending it to someone with the last name Lane. Who is this person? Silas's expression changed at those words, and he was left speechless for a moment. In the end, it was his grandmother who spoke up, saying it was Ivy Lane, Silas's cousin. She had some issues at home, and I thought since they were relatives, I'd have Silas transfer some money to her. What kind of issues could require transferring money for 4 or 5 years? Sure. Mother-in-law, her husband has passed away, and she is left alone to take care of her son. It's really a sad situation, and we can help her. I smiled and suggested that since they are family, why not invite her and her son to come and live with us? What? Silas was surprised. I smiled and said that we actually have a spare room in our house, and this way we could help her and also save you some expenses. All right, then I'll go pick them up in a few days. Silas was very happy. His mother-in-law nudged him and said, What do you mean in a few days? Just go tomorrow. It seemed that she couldn't wait to live with her grandson. The next day, Silas went to pick up Ivy and her child early in the morning. The mother-in-law went to the market early in the morning to buy groceries and prepared a sumptuous lunch. At lunchtime, Silas happened to walk in with Ivy and her child. Indeed, this Ivy is the same one I met at the hospital before, and her child is now about 3 or 4 years old. It seems that when I last saw her at the hospital, she was pregnant with her second child. I clenched my fists and gritted my teeth as I stepped forward to greet them. This child really resembles Silas in the features. A few people's faces looked quite bad. Grandma quickly tried to ease the tension, as we are all family and should stick together. I didn't intend to lose my temper at that moment, so I smiled and sat down to eat with everyone. However, the meal was quite bothersome for me. Silas and Ivy were secretly exchanging glances at the table without saying a word, while Jamie Lane kept either tossing food around with his hands or banging the dishes loudly. My mother-in-law kept praising him for being lively and adorable. Honestly, it made me lose my appetite, and I couldn't help but leave the table early. Just as I was about to head back to my room, Jamie suddenly ran over, blocking my path, and pointed to my mother-in-law not far away, saying, Grandma, I want to live in this room. Ivy came over and hugged the child, saying, Sister-in-law, please don't take it to heart. Jamie has had a tough life. He has never seen a room this big since he was born, and he dreams of sleeping in a big bed. After saying that, she started crying while holding the child. I felt as if I had bullied her. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law rushed over to me and said, Jamie must sleep in this room tonight. Silas joined in, saying, Jamie is so adorable, you definitely wouldn't want to refuse him, right? I glanced at Jamie, who had an oily face and 2 running nostrils, and forced a smile as I replied, of course I wouldn't. But since he's so young, it would be more comforting for him to sleep with his mom. What does that mean? Don't you want Jamie to sleep in our room? Silas's expression became serious. Grandma said anxiously, How can you be so rude? You don't even know to make way for guests. I suppressed my anger and explained with a smile, You misunderstood. I've just been busy with work lately, and want to rest in the study. Let Ivy and the children stay in the room. Silas said excitedly, Then I'll go sleep in Clara's room, so I won't disturb your work. I nodded in response. That night, as soon as I turned off the lights in the study, Silas quietly went to the master bedroom to sleep with Ivy and her child. I wasn't angry, as I had already set up surveillance and was waiting for them to fall into the trap. To make them feel completely relaxed, the next day I used my mother's illness as an excuse to move back to my parents' house. By the way, I took Jamie and Silas's hair to the identification center when I went out. However, before the results came back, this family started scheming. The reason was that after Ivy moved in, she saw my locked wardrobe full of beautiful clothes and shoes, which made her feel unbalanced, and she began to pressure Silas in various ways to buy her things. However, what she didn't realize was that without my help, Silas actually didn't have much money. As a result, Silas was looking for excuses every day to ask me for money, but I refused each time. Feeling helpless, he could only turn to his mother-in-law for advice. After some consideration, she suggested they take bold action to secure a large sum of money all at once. Silas asked, "Mom, what do you mean?" His mother-in-law recalled that her own family was quite wealthy, and if she were to be kidnapped, the kidnappers would likely demand a substantial ransom. A greedy look crossed her face as she continued, "I have an idea. If we collaborate with the kidnappers and split the money 50-50, it would be enough for us to live comfortably for the rest of our lives." Silas pondered for a moment and finally gritted his teeth and agreed. I witnessed this plot through the surveillance, and I was very angry. However, since they wanted to proceed with their plan, I wouldn't let them down. 3 days later, when Silas called to tell me that he had booked a private tour for me to help me relax, I pretended to agree on the surface but immediately arranged to meet Ivy and her son. When I returned home that evening, Silas and his mother were taken aback. "Why are you back?" I smiled and replied, "This is my home, why can't I come back?" Silas stammered a bit. I thought I helped you book a tour to go out and have some fun for a few days." "Oh, didn't Mom say last time that I wasn't very good at taking care of guests? So, I decided to give the travel opportunity to Ivy." At this moment, she should have already gotten on the car with the child. "What?" the mother and child exclaimed in unison, their faces suddenly turned pale. As I walked past them into the room, I noticed the table was filled with delicious food, and there were champagne and confetti nearby. "Oh, did you both know I was coming home today, and specially prepared a celebration for me?" Silas nodded absently. His grandmother rushed into the bedroom to make a phone call, and before long, her cries could be heard from inside. Startled, Silas quickly ran in to check on her, while I calmly took a seat and happily began to enjoy the feast before me. A few minutes later, Silas stormed out, fuming. "Are you still here eating? Do you know that Ivy and her child have been kidnapped? You should quickly ask your parents for 5 million. I want to rescue them." "Why should I do that?" "Silas, if you hadn't given the travel opportunity to Ivy, they wouldn't have gotten into trouble." I put down my chopsticks and asked, "Is there something wrong with the tour package you arranged for me?" Silas was taken aback for a moment and finally said, "How is that possible? They must have been kidnapped on the way." I took out my phone to show him Ivy's reply, sneering, "Didn't she say she was already on the bus?" Silas's face turned pale, and he hurriedly said, "Then the travel agency's liaison must have deceived me." "Well, then we should report it to the police," I answered coldly. "Don't call the police," Silas and his mother said in unison. I frowned and looked up at the guilty-looking Silas, then glanced at my mother-in-law, who was supporting herself against the wall as she came out of the room. Silas stammered, "What I mean is, what if they kill him after we call the police?" I scoffed and replied, "But even if we pay the ransom, the kidnappers may not release him anyway." The mother-in-law immediately said, "We've already agreed that once they receive the money, they will release the person right away." Silas quickly stepped forward to cover her mouth. However, I had already heard what I needed to hear. It seemed that my mother was quite familiar with the kidnappers. Given that, I certainly shouldn't get involved any further. I clapped my hands, preparing to stand up. "You can't ignore this. Ivy and her children will be finished." My mother-in-law kneeled down anxiously, crying, "Adele, it's all my fault. I wanted to help Silas pay off his debts, but I ended up going down the wrong path." She began to recount what had happened. Silas listened with cold sweat pouring down his back, quickly changing the original plan of kidnapping me into a scheme to kidnap someone else for ransom. Although what he said was full of holes, I didn't want to expose him. After some hesitation I said, my parents wouldn't spend that much money to save two strangers. However, if you could organize the information you have and send it to me, I can try to plead with them. Maybe we can find someone to help you and your mother. The two of them instantly brightened up when they heard this. That night, I took the evidence and went out. While I said I was going to ask my parents for help, I was actually reporting to the police. It was only when the police arrived to make the arrest that Silas realized it was me who had called them. I feigned innocence and said, No, it wasn't me, it was my parents who found an unreliable agency. We were all deceived by that person. Silas looked very displeased after hearing this. How could I possibly believe that? Honey, you're so smart. Yet you were tricked by a travel agency the last time you booked a trip for me. Silas was momentarily at a loss for words. When my mother-in-law was taken away by the police, she kept looking back, pleading with Silas and me for help. However, Silas just lowered his head and kept his distance, afraid of getting involved with his mother-in-law, truly showing that in times of crisis, everyone looks out for themselves. The day after the mother-in-law was taken away, the kidnappers were caught, and Ivy and Jamie were safely returned. Silas seemed indifferent, planning to take Jamie to the amusement park to celebrate. Ironically, as soon as his sister-in-law heard about their mother's situation, she immediately took leave to come home. The funny thing was that upon her return, the first thing she did was to come and hold me accountable, urging me to quickly think of a way to rescue her mom. She had no attitude of seeking help at all, which made me very angry. Your mother colluded with the kidnappers, and there is evidence right there. Who can save her? I can't do anything about it. In any case, my mother can't be wronged. Besides, you have a responsibility too. If you had given her enough money, how could she have those negative thoughts? Can you blame me for this? I took a deep breath and calmed down. Well, if you want to save your mother, that's fine. But are you capable of taking responsibility for her? My sister-in-law was taken aback and asked me why I should bear that responsibility. Couldn't someone else do it? Who would be willing to take on the role of the scapegoat? If it were someone else, they might feel the motivation is not strong enough, but for me to step in makes sense, especially since my mother was the one who previously helped my sister take on the responsibilities. After hearing this, my sister-in-law fell silent and no longer dared to say anything. In the days that followed, she never brought up the matter of saving someone again. However, because of this incident, my sister-in-law became increasingly resentful of me, and I caught her several times urging Silas to divorce me. Silas was still unwilling. He hoped I would change my mind and support him like I used to. My sister-in-law, feeling helpless, tried various ways to provoke me every day. During meals, she would often make sarcastic remarks and would frequently talk to friends and family about my shortcomings, which led Silas's relatives to call me to express their disapproval. I felt the time had come. There was no need to endure any longer, so I took the initiative to propose a divorce. At first, Silas wasn't very agreeable, but my sister-in-law said not to worry, since she wasn't spending a penny of his money anyway, and after the divorce, he could still claim half of her assets. Upon hearing this, Silas immediately felt shaken. Ivy also began to waver. She had been putting pressure on Silas in her mind, saying, I don't want to continue being in this undefined relationship with you. Our child is almost old enough for kindergarten. Aren't you afraid others will mock him for not having a father? After several rounds of argument, Silas finally agreed to the divorce. But when I placed the divorce agreement in front of him, he quickly realized what was happening and responded angrily, On what basis do you think you can make me leave with nothing? The money you've earned over the years isn't even enough to support yourself. The car and house were bought by me, and I'm the one paying for your mother's and sister's living expenses. Why should I leave empty-handed? Silas, don't be angry. I don't care about your car and house. After we get married, they will be shared assets, and you must give me half. After I said this, I handed him the lawyer's business card and added, If you have any issues in the future, just go through my lawyer. I threw the card at Silas and turned to leave. Silas was extremely angry and said he would hire a lawyer. To strengthen his position, he spread bad rumors about me everywhere and invited many relatives and friends to the court on the day of the hearing to criticize me. He even used our childlessness against me as an attack. When I presented him with the paternity test results between him and Jamie, he immediately changed his tone. He kept apologizing to me, using emotional appeals, saying that the child was just an accident, that he only loved me, and that the divorce was due to recent financial pressures that had clouded his judgment, urging me not to be too heartless. I simply smiled. Let me tell you, I actually knew all along that the car accident and the debts you mention were both lies. Silas was taken aback on the spot. By the way, the money you've spent on Ivy over the years also belongs to our joint marital property, and I will be claiming it back. Silas felt his legs go weak and nearly lost his balance. However, his sister-in-law was quite cheerful and stepped forward to encourage Silas, saying, "Don't worry, brother. You're capable. If anything, I'll just spend less in the future." Ivy chimed in, "That's right. With your skills, you'll be able to make a lot of money soon." Hearing their words, Silas immediately felt more confident and gritted his teeth, saying, "Don't worry. I will definitely ensure you both have a good life." I just smiled and remained silent, wanting to see if this man could stand on his own after I stopped helping him. However, it turned out that Silas did not perform exceptionally well. Although the divorce didn't leave him with nothing, being the guilty party meant he only received a small amount of cash in the end. However, their family was already accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, and within less than half a year, the money he got from the divorce was nearly spent. Left with no choice, Silas had to look for a job, but he never lasted long in any position, which ultimately resulted in the family being unable to even pay the rent. A relationship without a financial foundation is ultimately very fragile. Ivy started arguing with Silas every day, and he had no choice but to borrow money from relatives. However, this turn of events affected Clara the most. I used to take care of her, she was like a princess at school, but now Ivy has even stopped Clara from going to college to save money. I know all this because Clara told me herself. After enduring the hardships brought on by her new sister-in-law, she finally understood my concern. She told me that she had misjudged things before, and that person was nothing compared to me. I was the one who treated her the best. I scoffed and said, "Don't call me that anymore. I'm not your sister-in-law now. No, you will always be my sister-in-law." Then Clara suddenly knelt down and said, "Sister-in-law, could you please remarry my brother?" "Don't say that. You have no idea how free I felt since the divorce. I'm certainly not thinking about getting back together. Indeed, ever since the divorce, I felt like I've escaped from a bog. It's been much easier for me. I've even started working at the family business, and my quality of life has noticeably improved. I look a lot younger too." Clara, feeling helpless, had to rephrase her request. "Even if you're not considering reconciliation, could you help fund my college education? This reminds me of your attitude towards me in the past. Don't you have any awareness of that? Also, my money is hard-earned. I gave you so much before, and you weren't even grateful for it. It's even less likely now." Seeing my firm stance, Clara suddenly stood up and coldly said, "Fine, if you're so heartless, I'll make you regret it." After saying that, she quickly left. I frowned, confused about how a down-and-out person like her could dare to threaten me. A week later, a video titled "Rich Girl's Whim Ruins a Family" surfaced online and quickly attracted attention. The video showcased the scene of Clara asking me for financial support. However, because the camera was positioned quite far away, we couldn't hear the conversation between Clara and me, and the content needed voiceover to interpret it. Essentially, the video suggested that Silas and Ivy were childhood sweethearts, and that I, as the rich girl, used various means to break them apart. After that, I lost interest in Silas, not only dumping him but also taking away my family's wealth. At the same time, the money that Silas had transferred to Ivy from my account was misunderstood as compensation for breaking them up. This sparked widespread discussion online, with everyone blaming me, and even my parents got caught up in it. The Silas siblings took advantage of this controversy to quickly start a live stream to portray themselves as victims and make money. In response, I was very angry and decided to release the surveillance videos I had recorded in my bedroom. These videos not only proved my innocence but also exposed the various schemes that Silas and his siblings had against me. Soon, public opinion shifted, and many netizens began to defend me. It was truly disappointing that this man brought his mistress home. It was absolutely disgusting. People like him, who are so scheming, are simply incomprehensible. It seems he is determined to make others suffer. Their family is really unreliable, and fortunately, the female lead managed to escape quickly. It's really frustrating. As a result, Silas and his team not only failed to succeed, but they also lost the opportunity to earn money from live streaming, becoming people that everyone tried to avoid. After that, they completely quieted down and stopped bothering me. 6 months later, Silas suddenly called me, asking if I could lend him 2,000 yuan. What do you want to do? Silas hesitated for a moment and said, Clara is pregnant, and I want to borrow some money to help her with the surgery. It turned out that Clara had fallen out with Silas and his wife because she couldn't afford to go to college. After running away from home, she ended up with a married man, but once she got pregnant, he disappeared. Truly, bad deeds often meet with bad results. I could hardly suppress a laugh. Sorry, but I wouldn't lend you a single cent, even if it were for charity. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, Silas hurriedly said, Don't hang up, I still have something to tell you. He hesitated for a moment and asked somewhat awkwardly, How have you been lately? I frowned. Before I could respond, I heard Ivy shouting loudly on the phone, Which girl is that man talking to again? Silas quickly hung up. On a whim, I decided to call Silas back. Ivy answered the phone and questioned why I was calling Silas after their divorce. I calmly told her that I was calling to let Silas know I wouldn't be going to a hotel with him, and that he should cancel the room. Ivy accused Silas of wasting money on a hotel when we were barely making ends meet at home. With a loud shout from Ivy, I heard Silas's pained voice through the phone. After that, Silas never dared to call me again. Meanwhile, I successfully took over the family business, which thrived, and I received countless suitors. It's worth mentioning that one day after work, I saw a homeless man rummaging through a trash can downstairs at the office. His figure looked quite familiar, and I couldn't help but glance at him a few more times. It wasn't until I walked past him that I realized it was Silas. He had a face covered in stubble, and emitted an unpleasant odor that made me feel a bit nauseous. Upon hearing the sound I made, Silas quickly turned around. When he recognized me, he hurriedly dropped the takeout box he was holding and began to cry out loudly, Adele, it's me, Silas, your husband. I stepped back in disgust, and the security guard quickly came over to shield me. Silas was still crying, tears streaming down his face as he said, Adele, I was wrong. Ivy only cared about my money. After I lost my money, she became very aggressive, not only hitting me daily but also being with other men. When the security guard returned, I reminded him to have his colleagues throw their lunch boxes into the trash bins in the company to avoid attracting flies and affecting hygiene.